My name is Bridget Fuller. I'm 32 years old. And 2 Saturdays ago, I stood inside a ballroom filled with crystal chandeliers, white roses, and 200 wealthy guests, while strangers laughed at a name card that wasn't supposed to exist. Italian marble under my heels. String quartet near the dance floor. Champagne glasses catching gold light from ceilings high enough to echo. And in front of my dinner plate, an ivory place card written in elegant black calligraphy. Not my name. Not Bridget Fuller. Instead, 3 words designed to humiliate me publicly. Poor broke sister living off her brother. The woman beside me saw it first. Sharp inhale. Hand over mouth. Then came the whisper. The nudge. The laugh. And honestly, nothing spreads faster through wealthy people than socially approved cruelty. Within seconds, the entire table knew. Then the next one. Then another. Like humiliation itself had become tonight's entertainment. I looked toward the head table. Past the floral arrangements taller than children. Past the gold charger plates and imported wine bottles. And there he was. Gerald Whitfield. Father of the bride. Real estate developer. Country club king. The kind of man who shook hands like he expected ownership afterward. He raised his champagne glass slightly toward me. Not enough for others to notice. Just enough for me. And smiled. Interesting thing about powerful men. They often mistake silence for weakness right before everything collapses. Because what Gerald Whitfield didn't know, what nobody in that ballroom knew, was that humiliating me publicly would become the most expensive mistake of his entire life. But to understand why, you need to understand the couch first. Because everything important in my life somehow traces back to that couch. Brown fabric. Second-hand. One spring broken near the left armrest. Sat inside a 1-bedroom apartment above a laundromat where the pipes rattled every winter. That couch became my bed when I was 19 years old. Not temporarily. For 6 years. Because my little brother needed the bedroom more than I did. Dad died on a Tuesday in October. Heart attack. Warehouse night shift. 44 years old. I still remember the exact wording from the hospital nurse. I'm sorry, sweetheart. Interesting. Because adults always use softer voices when they're about to destroy your life permanently. I drove home 3 hours through rain that night. Hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my wrists cramped. And when I pulled into our apartment complex, Ethan was sitting outside on the front steps wearing dinosaur pajamas and holding Dad's old flashlight. 11 years old. Completely alone. Our mother had already disappeared years earlier. No goodbye note. No forwarding address. Just absence. Interesting how abandonment changes shape depending on age. Children cry first. Adults calculate survival immediately. The state caseworker arrived 48 hours later carrying a clipboard and practiced sympathy. She sat at our kitchen table beneath flickering fluorescent lights and explained the situation carefully. Without a legal guardian, Ethan would enter foster care placement by Friday. Friday. 4 days. I was 19 years old. Sophomore year at State University. Double major in accounting and business administration. Part-time insurance filing job. Shared dorm room. 0 savings. And suddenly, someone asked whether I could become a parent before the milk expired in our refrigerator. Interesting thing about life-altering decisions. Sometimes they happen so fast your emotions arrive afterward. I signed the guardianship papers using a pen attached to the clipboard by cheap plastic string. My hand shook the entire time. Not because I doubted the decision. Because deep down, I understood exactly what it would cost. I dropped out of college the following Monday. No dramatic speech. No noble declaration. Just paperwork. Withdrawal forms. Financial aid cancellation. Silence. I got 2 jobs immediately. Day shift as an office clerk at a plumbing supply warehouse. Evenings tutoring algebra at the community center. Ethan got the bedroom. I got the couch. Simple. Not heroic. Just necessary. Our apartment had one window facing an alley. The radiator screamed like dying machinery every winter. And some months. I skipped lunch 3 days a week so Ethan could join school field trips without realizing we were broke. Interesting thing about survival. You become excellent at hiding damage from children. Ethan never knew how often I cried inside laundromats because they were the only place loud enough to cover the sound. He never knew I wore the same winter coat for 7 years. Or that I learned double-entry bookkeeping at 2 in the morning after tutoring shifts because I refused to stay trapped forever. Because honestly, I didn't choose this life. But I chose him. And once you choose someone, really choose them. Quitting stops being an option. Years passed quietly. Not dramatically. Just steadily. Homework at kitchen tables. Second-hand backpacks. Frozen pizzas on birthdays. Science projects spread across living room floors while I balanced overdue electric bills beside them. Then suddenly, Ethan graduated high school with honors. Full scholarship. Architecture major. Same university I left behind. I cried in the parking lot afterward before driving us home for cheap celebratory pizza. Interesting thing about sacrifice. Sometimes you don't feel the weight until the person you carried finally stands on their own. While Ethan studied architecture, I returned to school myself. Community college first. Night classes. Weekend study sessions at public libraries while other women my age attended engagement parties and beach vacations. Then transfer applications. CPA prep exams. Coffee so strong it tasted medicinal. I graduated at 30. Passed the CPA exam on my first attempt. And got hired by Morrison & Klein. Third largest accounting firm in the state. No shortcuts. No charity. No rescue. Just years of surviving long enough for discipline to compound quietly. Ethan called every Sunday morning at exactly 8 o'clock during college. Every single week. We talked about professors. Apartment leaks. Terrible cafeteria food. Nothing important. Which honestly made those calls the most important thing in my life. Then one Wednesday. Not Sunday. My phone rang unexpectedly. His voice sounded different immediately. Lighter somehow. Bridge. Pause. I met someone. Her name was Paige Whitfield. Interior design student. Funny. Warm. Absolutely in love with my brother. And honestly, I liked her immediately. What I didn't understand yet was that Paige's last name came attached to an entire ecosystem. Whitfield. Old money pretending to be new money. Country club memberships. Political fundraisers. Real estate developments across 3 counties. And at the center of all of it, Gerald Whitfield. The first time I met him, he didn't shake my hand. He evaluated it. Interesting difference. Because some men greet people, while others calculate social value before deciding how much respect to perform. The Whitfield estate looked less like a house and more like a place politicians committed tax fraud inside. Gated entrance. Circular driveway. Stone fountain larger than my childhood bedroom. I wore a navy dress from Nordstrom rack clearance. And Dad's old Timex watch. Scratched crystal. Worn leather strap softened by 20 years of warehouse shifts. The only thing of his I still owned. Gerald opened the front door himself. Silver hair. Perfect posture. Smile sharp enough to feel rehearsed. His eyes moved over me quickly. Dress. Shoes. Watch. Assessment complete. So, Bridget. Pause. What exactly do you do? Interesting wording. Not. What field are you in? Or. How do you like your work? Just evaluation disguised as conversation. I'm a financial analyst at Morrison & Klein. He nodded once. Tiny nod. Then immediately turned toward his wife Diane and started discussing wine before I finished the sentence completely. Message received. Diane Whitfield smiled beautifully the way expensive women sometimes do when they're silently cataloging flaws. That dress is lovely, she said. Pause. Is it new? Interesting question. Because wealthy people rarely insult directly. They imply. Paige laughed nervously beside Ethan. And under the dinner table. My brother squeezed my hand once. Small gesture. Massive meaning. After dinner? Gerald pulled Ethan into his office. I stood in the hallway near a landscape painting pretending to admire brushstrokes while voices carried through the cracked door. First impressions. Our family image. Certain backgrounds. I couldn't hear Ethan's full responses. But I recognized Gerald's tone instantly. Not discussion. Instruction. That night. Driving home with Dad's Timex pressing against my wrist. I realized something important. Gerald Whitfield didn't dislike me because I was rude. Or loud. Or difficult. He disliked me because I reminded people Ethan came from somewhere ordinary. And men obsessed with status hate visible reminders of struggle. Especially when those reminders refused to feel ashamed. The engagement announcement arrived in a cream-colored envelope thick enough to feel expensive before opening it. Gold embossing. Whitfield family crest stamped into the corner. Yes. The family actually had a crest. Interesting thing about old money performance. Sometimes rich people turn themselves into museums. Inside. Formal invitation. Country club ballroom. Black tie cocktail attire. 120 guests. And somewhere beneath all the elegant language. A message. Know your place. I wore black heels that hurt after 20 minutes and a navy cocktail dress I bought on clearance 6 weeks earlier. Not designer. Not borrowed. Mine. Dad's Timex sat against my wrist beneath the sleeve. The scratched crystal caught chandelier light while valet attendants parked cars worth more than my yearly salary. Interesting contrast. Because somehow, Dad's $23 watch always made me feel wealthier than rooms full of people trying desperately to look important. The engagement party looked less like a celebration and more like a networking event disguised as love. Champagne towers. String quartet. Servers carrying tiny appetizers nobody actually wanted but everyone pretended tasted divine. Gerald worked the room like a politician before election season. Handshakes. Shoulder pats. Introductions delivered with carefully measured pride. This is Ethan Fuller. Pause. Brilliant young architect. Another pause. Self-made. Interesting word. Because every time Gerald called Ethan self-made, he erased me publicly without saying my name. I counted 4 times before dinner. Not once did he mention the 19-year-old girl who dropped out of college to keep Ethan out of foster care. Not once did he mention the couch. Or the tutoring shifts. Or canned soup dinners. Self-made sounded cleaner. More marketable. I found my table eventually. Near the bar. Back corner. 12 tables away from the head table were Gerald-seated senators, developers, and a woman from the State Finance Committee. Interesting seating arrangement. Because exclusion always becomes obvious once distance enters the equation physically. During cocktail hour, Diane intercepted me beside an enormous shrimp display shaped like a swan. Bridget, darling. Smile. Touch on the elbow. We're so excited you could attend. Interesting. Because people preparing to insult you often begin with compliments first. She handed me sparkling water instead of champagne. Didn't ask what I wanted. Just assumed. Then lowered her voice slightly. One quick thought. Pause. The rehearsal dinner next spring will include several of Gerald's associates. Another pause. You'll want something appropriate to wear. Appropriate. Interesting word. Because wealthy people use appropriate the same way other people use acceptable. I smiled politely. Thank you for the suggestion. Then drank the sparkling water she chose for me. Not because I felt small. Because dignity terrifies insecure people more than confrontation ever will. That night, I sat inside my Honda Civic in the country club parking lot for almost 15 straight minutes after the event ended. Engine off. Radio silent. Mercedes and Range Rovers surrounding me like chrome-plated judgment. And honestly, for the first time in years, I felt tired in a dangerous way. Not physically tired. Spiritually. Like no accomplishment would ever matter enough inside Gerald Whitfield's world because my origin story embarrassed him permanently. Then I opened my laptop. Created a new folder. Named it Receipts. Interesting choice maybe. But accounting teaches you something early. Documentation matters. I saved screenshots immediately. Diane's texts about appropriate attire. Emails suggesting I'd step back slightly from family events so the Whitfields and Fullers could bond naturally. Little comments. Tiny humiliations. Nothing dramatic individually. But together? Pattern. And patterns matter. Especially when rich people think politeness prevents record keeping. 3 weeks before the wedding, Gerald finally stopped pretending. He invited Ethan to lunch downtown. Private steakhouse. Leather booths. The kind of restaurant where waiters whisper specials like insider trading tips. Ethan came to my apartment afterward looking exhausted. Not physically. Emotionally. I was making spaghetti when he walked in. Cheap sauce bubbling on the stove. Same kitchen table where he once did multiplication homework while I balanced overdue utility bills beside him. Gerald offered him a job. Lead architect position at Whitfield Properties. Corner office. Company car. Salary double his current firm. And honestly, my first reaction was genuine happiness. That's incredible. Ethan stared at the garlic bread instead of me. There was a condition. There it was. Interesting thing about manipulative people. They rarely ask directly for ugly things. They imply. He kept talking about focus, Ethan said quietly. About how successful men look forward instead of backward. Backward. Interesting way to describe family sacrifice. Then Ethan finally looked at me. He said you remind people where I came from. Silence filled the kitchen immediately. Sauce bubbling softly behind us. Radiator clanking near the window. And honestly, that hurt more than the insults. Because Gerald wasn't trying to embarrass me anymore. He was trying to erase me strategically. He tried to buy your loyalty, I said finally. Ethan nodded once. I turned him down. Interesting. Because that was the exact moment Gerald Whitfield began losing control of the story. Not publicly yet. Quietly. Inside Ethan. I stirred the spaghetti sauce slowly so my hands had something to do besides shake. And honestly, I didn't cry. Not because I was strong. Because exhausted people eventually become too tired for dramatic emotions. Later that week, Gerald's personal assistant emailed me directly. Subject line: helpful relocation resources. Inside: apartment listings in Portland, Oregon. 2,700 miles away. Interesting level of confidence. Because apparently Gerald believed poor people disappeared once presented with enough distance and subtle pressure. I forwarded the email into the receipts folder immediately. Then added Diane's latest messages underneath. The folder grew quietly. Like evidence usually does. One screenshot at a time. Interesting thing about accountants. We survive by documenting what other people hope nobody tracks carefully. 11 days before the wedding, I prepared a manila envelope. 9 by 12 inch. Professional. The kind I used for audit files at work. Inside: 4 documents. 1. My CPA license. 2. Morrison & Klein employee badge with my title beneath my photo. 3. A commendation letter from a client whose company I saved from a catastrophic audit error worth nearly $2 million. And 4. My promotion offer. Senior manager effective June 1st. Salary increase. Benefits. Everything I fought through 13 years to reach. I stared at those documents spread across my kitchen table for a long time. Then slid them carefully into the envelope. Not as revenge. As insurance. Because deep down, I already suspected Gerald Whitfield wouldn't stop at subtle humiliation. Bullies rarely stop voluntarily once they believe silence equals permission. That Sunday, Ethan came over for coffee like always. Same couch. Same kitchen. Same cheap coffee mugs we'd owned for years. He looked exhausted. Bow tie fittings. Wedding logistics. Emotional pressure pulling him apart quietly. I'll be there, I told him. Pause. I'll smile. I'll sit wherever they put me. Then softer. But if Gerald crosses the line publicly. I stopped. Interesting thing about boundaries. Sometimes saying them aloud makes consequences feel real for the first time. Ethan set down his coffee carefully. If you walk out. Pause. I walk out too. Immediate panic hit my chest. No. Bridge. No. I pointed toward him across the kitchen table. This is your wedding. Do not destroy your future because your father-in-law is insecure. Ethan leaned back slowly against the couch cushions. And for one terrifying second, he looked exactly like Dad. Same jawline. Same exhausted steadiness. You are my future too. Honestly? That sentence almost broke me. Because suddenly, the little boy from the dinosaur pajamas felt gone forever. And sitting across from me instead was a man deciding what kind of husband he wanted to become. We sat quietly after that. Radiator ticking. Traffic outside. The ordinary sounds of a life we built together piece by piece. Before leaving, I tucked the manila envelope into my black clutch. Barely fit. Just edges visible beneath the zipper. Interesting. Because I still hoped I'd never need to open it. But somewhere deep down, I already knew Gerald Whitfield was planning something bigger than rude comments. And honestly, people obsessed with status eventually become reckless once humiliation starts feeling entertaining. The rehearsal dinner happened the night before the wedding. 40 guests. White linen tables. String quartet drifting through hallways large enough to echo. Gerald greeted every guest personally. Remembered vacation details. Children's names. Investment portfolios. Interesting talent. Because some men memorize people the same way corporations memorize client data. Not out of affection. Out of utility. Diane intercepted me near the doorway immediately. "You look nice," she said. Pause. Very practical. Interesting compliment. She led me to my seat at the far end of the table. Next to Gerald's former accountant's wife, who spent most of dinner discussing Peloton classes and gluten sensitivity. During the toast, Gerald stood holding crystal champagne beneath chandelier light. To my daughter. Smile. The light of this family. Applause. Then he turned toward Ethan. And to this remarkable young man who built himself from nothing. There it was again. Nothing. Interesting word for 13 years of sacrifice. I noticed someone watching me from the opposite side of the room. Silver hair. Reading glasses. Sharp eyes. Older woman seated alone. And importantly, the only person not laughing at Gerald's jokes. After dinner, Diane cornered me near the coat closet. "Tomorrow is Paige's day," she whispered, hand gripping my elbow lightly. "Please don't make it about yourself." I removed her hand gently. And honestly, my exhaustion finally outweighed politeness. "I have never made anything about me, Diane." Pause. "That's kind of the problem." Her expression flickered for half a second. Not guilt. Recognition. Then disappeared again. Performance restored. That night, I sat in my Honda Civic outside the estate for nearly 20 minutes. The manila envelope resting on the passenger seat beneath dashboard light. Tomorrow was the wedding. And deep down, I had the terrifying feeling that Gerald Whitfield believed humiliation would finally succeed if enough witnesses existed. He had no idea what happens when quiet people stop accepting erasure. The wedding started at 4 p.m. sharp. Whitfield Vineyard Estate. 70 acres of curated perfection pretending to feel effortless. White roses climbing stone archways. Imported candles floating across reflecting pools. String quartet beside the vineyard rose. And honestly, the entire event looked less like a wedding and more like a luxury brand commercial about emotionally unavailable rich people. Guests arrived in black cars with tinted windows. Women balancing champagne flutes and invisible competition simultaneously. Men discussing market projections between congratulations. Every smile polished. Every outfit strategic. Interesting thing about wealthy gatherings. Everyone performs comfort while secretly ranking each other constantly. I parked my Honda at the far end of the gravel lot beside catering vans and florist trailers. Not assigned there officially. Just instinct. Years around people like Gerald Whitfield teach you where they expect you to disappear naturally. I wore the navy dress again. Simple. Elegant enough. Dad's Timex pressed softly against my wrist beneath the sleeve. The scratched crystal caught sunlight while I walked toward the ceremony seating alone. And honestly, for one brief second, I considered leaving. Not dramatically. Quietly. Drive home. Take off the heels. Microwave leftover pasta. Let wealthy people celebrate each other without needing someone ordinary nearby to mock. Then Ethan saw me from across the vineyard. Standing near the altar in a charcoal suit. Nervous smile. And he looked relieved. That settled it. Because sometimes love means enduring rooms built specifically to remind you that you don't belong there. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Paige cried halfway through the vows. Ethan's hands shook slightly while placing the ring on her finger. Sunlight turning gold behind the vineyard rose. And honestly, watching my little brother marry someone he genuinely loved mattered more than Gerald Whitfield's opinions. For almost 2 hours, everything stayed peaceful. Cocktail hour. Dinner service. Music drifting beneath chandelier light. I even started relaxing slightly. Interesting mistake. Because arrogant people save humiliation for maximum audience size. Dinner seating began around 7:15. 200 guests moving toward assigned tables beneath hanging crystal installations. Servers carrying wine bottles between conversations about hedge funds and destination schools. I found table 14 near the ballroom center. Not terrible placement. Interesting. Maybe Gerald finally decided basic decency cost less than cruelty publicly. Then I saw the place card. Ivory cardstock. Elegant black calligraphy. Poor broke sister living off her brother. At first, my brain literally rejected what my eyes read. Like the sentence physically didn't belong inside reality. The woman beside me inhaled sharply. Another guest covered his mouth trying not to laugh. Then whispers started. Fast. Dangerously fast. Interesting thing about public humiliation. Crowds join immediately once someone wealthy signals permission. Within seconds, people across nearby tables were staring openly. Smiling. Whispering. Pretending not to while absolutely doing it. I looked toward the head table automatically. And there he was. Gerald Whitfield. Crystal champagne glass in hand. Watching me. Not hiding it. Not even slightly. Then he lifted the glass a fraction of an inch. Tiny gesture. Massive message. He did this. Deliberately. Publicly. And honestly? Something inside me went completely calm. Not rage. Clarity. Because suddenly, all the little comments finally reached their logical conclusion. Appropriate attire. Backgrounds. Self-made. Nothing. Gerald Whitfield spent years trying to erase my sacrifice politely. Tonight, he simply removed the politeness. A server approached nervously. Ma'am. Pause. I think there may have been a printing mistake. Interesting. Because working-class people often rush to explain cruelty away before acknowledging someone powerful might actually mean it. I smiled gently. No. Looking directly at Gerald. I don't think it was a mistake. Silence spread around the table afterward. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Then Gerald stood slowly from the head table. Interesting timing. Because narcissists always mistake escalation for control. He raised his champagne glass lightly. Ladies and gentlemen. Room quieting immediately. I believe there's been some confusion regarding seating. Polite laughter. Nervous. Performative. Gerald smiled toward me. But Bridget has always appreciated honesty. There it was. Not even pretending anymore. People shifted uncomfortably around me now. Nobody intervened. Of course not. Because crowds rarely oppose humiliation while powerful people lead it confidently. Gerald continued. My future son-in-law is an extraordinary example of perseverance. Pause. A young man who rose above very modest beginnings. Modest beginnings. Interesting phrase for poverty and dead parents. And while we're grateful for everyone who helped him along the way. Smile widening slightly. Some people become too attached to sacrifice. There it was. The real accusation. Dependency. Gerald wanted the room believing Ethan succeeded despite me. Not partly because of me. I looked around the ballroom slowly. Crystal chandeliers. White roses. Expensive people pretending this was normal. And honestly, I suddenly felt exhausted by all of it. Not embarrassed. Exhausted. Then a voice spoke from behind Gerald calmly. Oh, for God's sake, Gerald. The entire room froze. actually froze. Because wealthy rooms fear older women who stop caring about consequences. The silver-haired woman from rehearsal dinner stood near the dance floor holding a wine glass. Reading glasses low on her nose. Completely unimpressed. Gerald's jaw tightened instantly. Lorraine. No. Simple word. Absolute authority. Interesting. Because apparently someone inside this ecosystem still terrified Gerald Whitfield. Lorraine stepped closer slowly. And honestly? The room changed around her. Like everybody suddenly remembered she mattered more than the chandeliers. This again, she asked. 30 years old and you still need audiences before humiliating women? Silence detonated through the ballroom. 30 years. Interesting number. Because suddenly, this wasn't about me anymore. This was history. Gerald laughed tightly. I think you're overreacting. Lorraine stared at the place card. Then directly at him. No. Pause. I think Bridget finally joined a very long list. Whispers exploded immediately afterward. Tiny fragments floating table to table. First wife. Assistant. Fundraiser incident. Interesting. Because apparently Gerald Whitfield had a pattern. And patterns eventually create witnesses. Lorraine turned toward me next. Really looked at me for the first time. Then softly asked. You're the sister who raised Ethan? I nodded once. The ballroom somehow got quieter. Which honestly shouldn't have been possible. Lorraine inhaled slowly. Then looked back toward Gerald. You humiliated the woman who gave up her entire 20s raising her brother after his parents died? No answer. Huge answer. Paige stood abruptly from the head table then. Chair scraping loudly against marble flooring. What is she talking about? Gerald didn't look at his daughter. Interesting. Because manipulative fathers survive by controlling narratives? Not answering direct questions. Lorraine answered for him instead. Your father hates visible struggle. Pause. It reminds him his money can't manufacture character. The room reacted physically to that sentence. People shifting. Looking down. Avoiding eye contact. Because suddenly, the joke stopped feeling funny. Gerald stepped toward Lorraine sharply. That's enough. But she ignored him completely. Interesting thing about wealthy matriarchs. Once they decide someone deserves public correction, they become unstoppable. Lorraine pointed toward me. Do you know where Bridget slept for 6 years while raising her brother? Silence. On a broken couch above a laundromat. More silence. While working 2 jobs after dropping out of college to keep Ethan out of foster care. The ballroom felt different now. Not entertained. Ashamed. And honestly, I hated that part most. Because suddenly, people respected me only after suffering became dramatic enough for them. Paige looked at Ethan slowly. Tears already forming. You never told me. Ethan answered quietly. She never wanted credit. Interesting. Because real sacrifice rarely advertises itself. Gerald straightened his jacket sharply. Attempting recovery. Attempting authority. Family history doesn't change the fact that Bridget has remained financially dependent on Ethan emotionally. That's when I finally stood up. Not angrily. Calmly. And honestly? That scared Gerald more. Because bullies depend on emotional reactions to maintain control. I picked up my black clutch from the table slowly. Then removed the manila envelope. 9 by 12. Professional. Ordinary. Interesting how ordinary objects sometimes carry enough truth to destroy entire reputations. Gerald's expression shifted immediately. Tiny flicker. Instinct. Like deep down. He suddenly realized this story might not end the way he planned. The ballroom went completely silent. Not polite silence. Dangerous silence. The kind where people suddenly realize entertainment may turn into consequences. I stood beside table 14 holding the manila envelope against my side while 200 wealthy guests watched like they'd accidentally wandered into a completely different kind of event. Crystal chandeliers above us. String quartet still playing softly somewhere near the bar because nobody had told them the wedding reception quietly transformed into a public reckoning. And honestly, for the first time all night, I stopped feeling tired. Because suddenly, I understood something clearly. Gerald Whitfield depended on shame. That was the entire mechanism. Convince ordinary people to feel small enough, and they'll participate in their own humiliation voluntarily. Interesting strategy. Terrible weakness once someone stops cooperating. I looked at the place card one last time. Poor broke sister living off her brother. Then carefully placed it face down on the table. Not dramatic. Just finished with it. Gerald crossed his arms immediately. Interesting posture. Because powerful men often physically brace themselves once control starts slipping publicly. If you have something to say, Bridget. Pause. Say it. There it was. Permission disguised as confidence. He genuinely believed I would cry. Or storm out. Or create the exact emotional spectacle wealthy people use later as evidence that working-class women are unstable. Instead, I opened the envelope calmly. Removed the first document. CPA license. Official seal catching chandelier light. I handed it to the woman seated nearest me first. Then another copy to someone else. Interesting thing about accountants. We trust paper trails more than speeches. Murmurs spread quietly around the ballroom as the documents moved table to table. Gerald frowned slightly. Tiny reaction. Massive crack. This is my certified public accountant license, I said evenly. Pause. I earned it while working full-time and raising my brother after our father died. Nobody laughed now. Not even close. I removed the second document. Morrison and Klein employment confirmation. Senior financial manager promotion offer effective June 1st. Projected salary printed clearly near the bottom. 6 figures. Bonuses. Equity track. And honestly, I almost hated revealing it. Because suddenly, people who dismissed me 30 seconds earlier started looking impressed for reasons that had nothing to do with character. Interesting how money suddenly creates respect once wealthy people recognize the number. I passed the paper forward anyway. Then looked directly at Gerald. I have never lived off my brother. Silence. Heavy. Final. I raised him. That sentence hit the room differently. Not because it was loud. Because everybody suddenly understood the timeline. 19 years old. Dead father. Dropped out of school. Couch. Jobs. Survival. And Ethan? My little brother. Stood up slowly from the head table beside Paige. Eyes already red. Then quietly added. She gave up her 20s so I could have mine. Honestly? That nearly broke me more than the humiliation itself. Because sacrifice feels survivable while it's happening. Recognition afterward is what hurts. Paige looked at her father next. Actually looked at him. And for the first time all evening. She seemed genuinely confused by who he was. You told everyone she depended on Ethan. Gerald adjusted his cufflinks automatically. Interesting habit. Because insecure men often straighten expensive clothing when losing control internally. I was making a point about boundaries. Boundaries. Interesting rewrite for public cruelty. Lorraine laughed softly into her wine glass. Gerald, you mocked a woman who spent 6 years sleeping on a couch to keep her brother out of foster care. Pause. Do you hear yourself? The ballroom stayed painfully quiet. Some guests looked embarrassed now. Others fascinated. A few pretending to check phones while listening to every word. Because honestly, rich people love morality once it becomes socially safe. I removed the final document from the envelope carefully. Old guardianship paperwork. Court seal slightly faded. Ethan's name beside mine. Temporary guardian. Age 19. The woman seated beside me covered her mouth immediately after reading it. Then passed it down the table silently. Interesting. Because suddenly, the room stopped seeing me as Gerald described me. And started seeing records instead. Truth documented. Sacrifice documented. Years documented. Gerald noticed the shift too. Of course he did. Men obsessed with status monitor audience loyalty instinctively. He stepped toward me finally. Smile gone now. This isn't the time or place for family drama. There it was. Interesting phrase. Because people who humiliate others publicly always call it drama once the truth turns against them. I looked around the ballroom slowly. White roses. Crystal chandeliers. Guests avoiding eye contact now. And honestly, I suddenly felt unbelievably sad for Gerald Whitfield. Not because he embarrassed me. Because this room, this performance, was probably the only way he knew how to feel important. You made it the time and place, I answered quietly. Then softer. I just brought documentation. A few people actually laughed at that. Not cruel laughter. Recognition. Gerald's face darkened immediately. Paige stepped away from the head table then. Wedding dress brushing marble floors softly as she approached me. Tears running carefully through makeup worth more than my monthly grocery budget. And honestly, I expected pity. Or apology. Instead, she hugged me. Hard. Immediate. And whispered directly into my ear. You're the reason Ethan became the man I love. That did it. That was the moment I finally almost cried. Not because Gerald failed to humiliate me. Because somebody finally understood the couch mattered. The years mattered. The invisible work mattered. Ethan joined us seconds later. One arm around Paige. One around me. And suddenly, the ballroom no longer felt hostile. Just expensive. Gerald stood alone near the head table now. Interesting image honestly. Because powerful men rarely notice isolation forming until everyone else already stepped back emotionally. Diane tried speaking finally. Gerald. Quiet warning. Too late. Lorraine finished her wine calmly. Then looked directly at him. You spend so much time trying to impress important people. Pause. You never learned how to recognize one. Absolute silence afterward. Because honestly, there was nothing left to add. Gerald looked around the ballroom. Guests avoiding his eyes now. Business associates whispering. Paige standing beside me instead of him. And for the first time all evening, he looked unsure. Not embarrassed. Uncertain. Like someone discovering money can't automatically purchase control over every narrative. I gathered the documents carefully back into the envelope. CPA license. Promotion letter. Guardianship paperwork. Years of invisible labor reduced to paper evidence because apparently some people only respect sacrifice once stamped officially. Then I picked up my clutch. Adjusted Dad's old Timex against my wrist. And honestly, that watch suddenly felt heavier somehow. Not burden heavy. Legacy heavy. Because Dad never left money. Or property. Or influence. He left me responsibility. And somehow, that became enough to build a life anyway. I started toward the ballroom exit quietly. No dramatic speech. No revenge fantasy. Just finished. Then Ethan called after me. Bridge. I turned. My little brother smiled through tears. And in front of 200 guests. Said the single sentence Gerald Whitfield spent years trying to erase. She raised me. Simple words. Massive truth. The ballroom applauded. Actually applauded. Not because wealthy people suddenly became good. Because public opinion shifts instantly once courage becomes socially safe. Interesting thing about crowds. Most people are followers wearing moral opinions temporarily. Outside. Night air hit cold against my skin. Valley lights reflecting across wet pavement. My Honda Civic waiting beside rows of luxury cars like it belonged to an entirely different world. And honestly? For the first time in years, I stopped feeling ashamed of where I came from around rich people. Because suddenly, I understood something Gerald Whitfield never would. There's nothing embarrassing about sacrifice. The embarrassing thing is needing money and status so badly you mistake kindness for weakness. 3 days later, Paige removed Gerald from several wedding planning decisions completely. 2 months later, Ethan rejected the Whitfield Properties offer permanently. And Lorraine? Interesting woman. She mailed me a handwritten note 6 weeks after the wedding. Inside. One sentence. Women like you are why families survive after men like Gerald fail them. I keep that note beside Dad's Timex now. Not because I need validation. Because honestly, sometimes surviving long enough to be seen correctly feels like its own inheritance.